Power creep is when new characters, weapons, or abilities are more powerful than existing ones, rendering older content obsolete. The most obvious example of this is in card games, where often the newest cards become the meta, rendering previous cards useless. League of Legends has been around for 16 seasons, with new champions, items, and features being added every single year. So how can the most basic 2009 champion like Malphite and an extremely complex new champion like K'Sante exist in the same game? Well, I've been going through the wiki, reading patch note after patch note, and now it's finally time for us to answer the question of how bad is the power creep in League of Legends. Before looking into anything, let's just straight up compare the win rates of the 40 oldest champions and the 40 newest champions. If power creep was extremely obvious like it is in card games, these newest champions would all have positive win rates and the oldest champions would all have negative win rates. But really, on patch 16.4, taking an average across all ranks in the game, the oldest 40 champions have 27 positive win rates and the 40 newest champions only have 15 positive win rates. So there it is, no power creep in League of Legends. Video done. But it's not that simple when it comes to MOBA power creep like it is with card games. One of the biggest problems that players often talk about is mobility creep. If we look at the same list of original champions and recent champions, observing how many mobility options they have, either dashes or movement speed increases, we can see that on average, the most recent 40 champions have almost double the amount of mobility than the original roster. Some of the original roster have literally zero mobility options, like Veigar, Cho'Gath, and Karthus. And from the original roster, only Warwick has more than 2 mobility options, with his Q, W, and R, but this is also post-rework. Before his rework back in Season 7, he only had 2 mobility options, being his Blood Hunt and his ult. Whereas a new champion like Ambessa has the opportunity to dash 5 times with her kit if she uses all her spells. Bel'Veth has 4 dashes in one ability, or even a champion like Pyke, where 3 out of 4 of his abilities are mobility options. I would say the most recent champion with the lowest mobility is Renata, and if you've ever played her, you can feel this, as only her W gives movement speed and it's on a massive cooldown. But it's not just new releases contributing to mobility creep, because whenever a champion gets reworked or updated, Riot often sneaks in some more mobility into their kits. There are so many examples of this. Skarner update giving him the E through walls, Rell update giving her the speed up on E, Rammus ult update, Nunu's snowball update, Talon jumping over walls, and so many more. But the examples that really show the mobility creep are Ahri and Amumu. These 2 champions had existing mobility spells, but they were just given even more mobility to simply keep up with the mobility creep in the game. Amumu was given 2 charges on his Q, basically doubling his mobility, and Ahri's ult used to just have 3 charges, 3 dashes in one ability. That's pretty good. But because of the mobility creep, Ahri was given resets on her ult charges every time she killed an enemy. This almost tripled the amount of potential dashes her ult can give her. It's very evident that on average, League of Legends champions now have more mobility, meaning other champions must become more mobile to match their pace, or they must be able to hit mobile champions easier. But perhaps this is the sweet spot where Riot wants champions to be. If the mobility creep kept going, we would see more champions like Ambessa with mobility on all of their abilities. But I really don't think Riot would let mobility in the game get that ridiculous. But there are exceptions to this rule, as many old champions are iconic for their mobility. Lee Sin, Riven, Yasuo, and Kalista were all released before Season 5 and are known for being some of the most mobile champions in the game. So high mobility champions have always been in the game, but it is evident that the new releases and reworks have on average been creeping up the level of mobility in League of Legends. Another point of power creep that League players worry about is what many call ability text creep. Now this is the hardest power creep to quantify, but let me show you an example. This is Nasus's passive. Nasus has an additional 12 to 24% lifesteal. Very simple. Meanwhile, this is Akshan's passive. After launching an attack, Akshan will fire an additional shot, 20 movement speeds or abilities, deal an additional 15. Akshan also gains a 42 shield for 2 seconds with a 16 to 4 second cooldown. The longer League has been out, the better Riot has gotten at game development, allowing them to do more when it comes to champion design. Champions like Viego, Sylas, Ivern, Yuumi, Aphelios, and many more just simply could not exist at League of Legends release. But do these new, more complex champions cause power creep, invalidating older champion designs? If you think about it, Akshan's W is kind of crazy. It's a Twitch-like stealth ability that has infinite duration against walls. It's a Warwick Blood Scent ability for champions that have been killed recently, which also generates you additional gold, and it allows you to revive your teammates. Meanwhile, Nasus's W slows the enemy and cripples their attack speed. The League player base has deemed many of these new champions as having overloaded kits, meaning their spells don't just do one thing, but do many things, giving them way more tools when compared to older champions. For example, K'Sante's W doesn't just give him damage reduction, but it also does damage to the enemy, stuns the enemy, pushes enemies, and gives him a dash, making it have a plethora of uses. But is a champion that has more features in their kit more powerful than a very simple champion? Well, one thing that is obvious is that these complex new kits create greater mastery curves. If we average stats across all ranks, Nasus has a higher win rate than Akshan, but the higher elo you get, the stronger Akshan becomes. As a tank player, using K'Sante's ult in the most optimal way to win a fight is much harder than using Amumu's ult and stunning all the enemies around you. This puts more power into the game, but it can only be accessed through mastery and effort. The other thing is the more features your kit has, the worse your champion numbers must be in order to compensate. This is why there are quote-unquote stat stick champions. Champions like Trundle, Garen, Tryndamere, Mordekaiser, and many others that are so simple they will simply out-stat check the enemy even if they are ahead. We can see if having more complicated kits makes champions more difficult by checking their win rate in each rank. Looking at the average rank of gold, the newest 40 champions have a negative average win rate of 49.61%, while the oldest 40 champions have a positive win rate of 50.5%. If we then compare the oldest 40 champions win rate from gold to diamond, it changes by 2.5%, whereas the newest 40 champions win rate changes more, going up 2.75%. This shows that the power and complexity of the newer champions is actually worse for the average player, but as players get better, it becomes more impactful. But even then, at the higher ranks, older champions still, on average, have a higher win rate than the new overloaded champions. This shows that older champions are not completely invalidated by the newer champions' complex kits. If we again directly compare Nasus and Akshan between low and high ranks, Akshan has a 49.21% win rate in gold, while Nasus has a 41.4% win rate. But in Diamond Plus, Nasus's win rate still increases, going to 52.81%. But Akshan's win rate really increases, going to 53.26%. This means Akshan gained a full 4% win rate. So, does this add power into the game? Maybe at the high ranks, these complex champions have become more prevalent, bringing up the average power of high elo games as they can do more than simple champions like Nasus. But this isn't fully the case. While new champions on average have higher mastery curves because of their complex kits, Some of the oldest champions in the game have infinite levels of mastery. Champions like Yasuo, Zed, Thresh, Nidalee, Lee Sin, and Draven were all released before Season 3 and are extremely skill expressive. These champions have existed for so long, being extremely complex with what players can get out of their kits. Despite what some players might say, there is no one champion that is capable of doing everything, and if a new champion is too strong, Riot will nerf them or bring them in line with the rest of the roster. And even in some rare cases, completely gut a champion or fundamentally change some of their mechanics, like in the case of Mel and K'Sante. In my opinion, these newer champions do, on average, have more in their kits, and have somewhat brought up the power level of the game, especially if we compare it to released League of Legends. But these new champions have not completely invalidated older champions. Players still have huge amounts of success on some of the oldest champions in the game. But one could argue that the 130 gameplay updates that Riot has given out to older champions may be the result of champions' kits getting more and more complicated. But if League of Legends had really bad power creep, champion ability numbers would be constantly going up, as every champion tries to stay relevant and in the meta. But a champion like Malphite, who has been in the game since release, has had his Q damage changed once in 16 seasons, and it was literally changed in Season 1. Malphite's Q has changed from 80 to 300 damage with a 60% AP ratio on release to now doing 70 to 270 damage with a 60% AP ratio. But this isn't just a standalone example. Annie's Q damage has changed by 5% AP and a bit of base damage over 16 years. You can take almost any champion, look through their years of patch notes, and find this kind of thing. To reinforce this even more, let's look at an old champion like Annie and compare her to Vex and see how their numbers stack up. Both of these champions are mages who want to catch enemies with their ult, having very similar playstyles, but they were released 12 years apart. Vex's Q deals 70 to 250 base damage with a 70% AP ratio. Annie's Q deals 80 to 260 damage with an 80% AP ratio. Not just that, both their Ws also deal similar damage, but as Annie doesn't have a third damaging spell, hers has a higher ratio. And even more than that, both of their ults have almost the exact same numbers. Annie's ult deals 150 to 400 base damage with a 75% AP ratio, while Vex's ult deals 150 to 350 base damage with a 50% AP ratio. Obviously, these two ultimates act differently, and Annie's gives magic pen on each level, while Vex's has two separate parts, so it deals more damage. But you can see that while Annie and Vex have been released so far apart, both of their numbers are actually very closely aligned with each other. Now, champions do get changed, have their kits reshaped with their ratios going up and down wildly to make certain abilities more important, but the fact that these damage numbers and ratios really stay within a close range of each other when the champion releases were so far apart really shows a lack of power creep when it comes to ability numbers. But it's not just champions that are vulnerable to power creep. Every player also chooses between runes and items to amplify what their champion is capable of. Runes are harder to track, as the system has been changed quite a few times. But back before the big rune update, they used to just give simple stat increases. But now with every player having a keystone and many sub-runes, this has for sure added more power to champions. One of the other major impacts of runes is making mana less relevant. With runes like Mana Flow Band and Presence of Mind, it's clear to see that mana is less punishing than it was on League of Legends release. But what we can clearly track is how much power creep has occurred in items that were added in Season 1. Some persistent items that have been around since Season 1 are Rabadon's Deathcap, Infinity Edge, Zhonya's, and Bloodthirster. All the way back in Season 1, Rabadon's Deathcap cost 3,600 gold, gave the user 140 AP, and then increased your total AP by 30%. And over 16 seasons of game changes, the price has gone down 100 gold, and the AP has actually decreased by 10. Some could argue that the price going down is a bit of power creep, but it's not like the percentage AP that Rabadon's is known for has wildly increased. It's a similar situation with Infinity Edge. In Season 1, Infinity Edge cost 3,830 gold, gave the user 80 attack damage and 25% crit chance, and increased your crit damage by 50%. Now in Season 16, the price has gone down to 3,500, but to compensate, it only gives 75 AD, 25% crit chance, and 30% crit damage. Again, you could argue that the price going down is a bit of power creep, but with the crit damage also going down to only 30%, this might actually even be a bit of power deflation. But one of the most insane examples is that Zhonya's, over 16 years, has had its costs go down by a simple 50 gold and gives 5 more AP. So many patch notes, so many seasons, and it's actually crazy to see how little some of these items have changed. In Season 4, Bloodthirster was changed to now give an overshield, so we can look at it then and compare the power levels of Season 4 to the present day. The price in Season 4 was 3,500, and now it's 3,400, and the AD and lifesteal are both exactly the same. The overshield is slightly down, but now lasts until destroyed, not falling off after 15 seconds. But there is barely any power creep, just a slight cost reduction. Some older items are harder to compare. Blade of the Ruined King, for example, had its active changed, passive changed, and price changed pretty heavily to compensate. But although it's not the same as it was in Season 1, since Season 7 when it was changed, its lifesteal has gone down by 5%, and its price has also gone down by 200 gold. One of the most essential items in League of Legends is Boots of Speed, so let's see how much it's changed. In Season 1, it cost 350 gold and gave you 50 movement speed. Then in Season 2, it changed to only give you 25 movement speed. Then in Season 5, its cost was reduced to 300 gold, bringing it in line with where it is today. And that's it. Over 16 seasons, Boots has only changed 3 times. And since Season 5, there has been no changes to the power of Boots. All in all, it seems like items have not been power crept very much, which was very surprising to me, considering we had 2 seasons of mythic items that completely changed how the item shop balancing worked. But what players might not think about when considering power creep is how much has been added to the game that's not just items, champions, and runes. If items are almost exactly the same and champions are almost exactly the same, there has been so much other stuff added on top to give every player more power. Think about it. In early seasons, dragons just gave you gold, and Baron gave you gold and a buff. Now we have elemental dragon buffs, dragon souls, we have void grubs and heralds pushing turrets, and now this season, all the turrets have plating, meaning even more accessible gold, meaning faster item spikes. Junglers also now share buffs with their teammates, giving more power to both the jungler and the laner. Support items have also been added to the game, giving another role even more gold generation and their own items, whereas back on League of Legends release, supports had almost no resources. Trinkets are also in the game, meaning players have to spend less money on vision, giving them more gold for items. Jungle plants are in the game, and while not obvious, they also add vision power, add mobility, and give players more lane sustain. All of this is without mentioning the features we had last season, with the Blood Rose mechanic, feats of strength, and the Otacon buff. On top of all of those features that have been added to the game, this season added role quests, giving every role additional rewards and yet again giving players more power. If all the champions and item numbers have stayed the same, I would say these systems have absolutely power crept League of Legends. But this power isn't as noticeable as every player is able to access it. This doesn't directly invalidate anything in the game, but it is interesting to see where Riot will draw the line, or maybe even pull back some power from these game systems, as Riot can't just simply keep adding more to the game every single year, as fundamental systems like farming minions or objectives may become less important. But what has really been the biggest power creep for League of Legends is simply just how good the average League of Legends player has become. Players farm better, understand game concepts better, are more efficient with their time in the game, and are much better mechanically than on League of Legends release. If players are better, especially those at extremely high ranks, then those players are getting so much power out of every part of the game. But if we compare this to a card game, where a card is balanced around being in your deck, and when you play it, a League of Legends character gets stronger not just by whether you pick it or play it, but as the player gets better at the game. The best example of this in League of Legends is Lee Sin, a champion that was released in Season 1. Lee Sin has slowly been studied and improved on by the player base every single season. A combo like the Insect was super impressive back in Season 3, but now in a normal game, the enemy Lee Sin will easily Insect you, Rivens will do fast Q combos, Yasuo's will Keyblade you, ADCs will Space Glide on you, and mages will just hit more skill shots. If players are getting more power out of each champion in the game, this increases the power level of the game when compared to League of Legends release. So how bad really is the power creep in League of Legends? Well, it seems like the power creep on champions has been very minimal. Although newer champions are more complex and have more mobility, almost every champion in the game is viable, and their numbers have barely changed over 16 seasons. In terms of item power creep, when comparing some of the oldest items in the game to their current states, on average items are slightly cheaper, but their stats have barely changed in 16 seasons. But the main point of power creep in League of Legends is all the systems that have been stacked on top of each other throughout the years. With every season adding new systems and features, these have subtly injected a decent amount of power into League of Legends. But I do have to take my hat off to Riot. The fact that most champions are viable depending on skill level is so insanely impressive with the amount of things that they have to balance in League. But in my opinion, Riot can't keep adding new systems year after year. Imagine if Atakan, Blood Roses, and Feats of Strength were still in the game, on top of all the other things they added this year. It feels like the durability update and the reduced minion spawns after 14 and 30 minutes was a way for them to overcome this power creep. But changes like these don't feel sustainable, so it will be interesting to see where Riot takes the game.